All right, welcome everybody to Storytelling Masterclass. Over the next 3 weeks, we are going to focus heavily on building your story base, your story database, as well as your confidence in storytelling. So this is a very interactive experience. So if you are watching this on the replay, you will see that we stop the video and encourage you to go work on things and then come back and continue on. And those of you who are here live, you're going to get this opportunity to do that here. And then I'm going to open it up and do Q&A after each session where you have time to work. So if you have questions, that we can get those answered for you. Let me share my screen and we're going to pop into the presentation. Okay. Holly, can you see my screen? Will you give me a thumbs up if you can? Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, storytelling for your business. That's the focus of the next 3 weeks. Here is what come on. There we go. Here is what we're going to talk about. So I've broken this down into 3 segments over the next 3 weeks. Today, we're going to talk about the art and science of storytelling, how to be compelling and interesting in your stories, how to motivate and influence, and then the 4 outcomes when you're telling a story. Next week, we're going to start really digging in to building your story database. So I'll talk about frameworks. I'm going to talk about the expertise stories and your so what stories. And then we will wrap up in the 3rd week with a concept known as chunking sideways and how to develop some story. And when I say story, I will say that I use that term loosely at times. Sometimes it's a statement or it's an example that paints a picture in the other person's mind. So that will make sense when we get to chunking. We're going to talk about surprise benefit stories and how to use those in your business. And then we will wrap up this training with tips for telling your stories well. So once you've got that database, now it's just a matter of you going out and telling them and being effective when you do it. This is the format for the training. Again, if you haven't taken a masterclass from me before, this is how it rolls. We do these in 2-hour sessions. There is delivery of content, then there's implementation time, and then there is Q&A, and then we go back, deliver content, implement, and do Q&A, okay? These are being recorded, and you'll have access to these until the end of June. So you can go back and rewatch anything that you want to, or I guess rewatch if you want. That's what it's there for. Now, before we begin, if you haven't done this yet, please introduce yourself in the chat so that people know who you are. You will see a different mix of people. Some of you will be here all 3 weeks. I hope that's the case. Some people will come in and go based on their schedule. So, and then we'll actually have people in the class who are only watching the replays. So, but for those of you who are here, it's always interesting to know who's in the room. So please share about yourself, because there may be a really good connection for you here that you wouldn't have known about if you didn't share about who you are, okay? Now, hopefully you all received your workbook in the mail, except for Crystal, because hers I messed up on, but it's on its way. So it looks like this. If you don't have this, that let me know, because we actually did track and make sure they were all delivered. So it's there for you somewhere, but if you don't have it, put it in the chat box and I will send you a PDF version as soon as I do the next break. I can't see the chat when I am in presentation mode, so I'm sorry if you're starting without your workbook. We did ship it to you. It's there somewhere for you, and I will get you copies. We're going to work through pages 10 today in the workbook. So we're going to start on page 3 of the workbook. So you might want to open that now if you don't have it. And let's talk about how story affects the brain. So this is the art and the science of storytelling. This is the part where I really geek out. And hopefully this will be interesting to you as well. So there are these 4 things, like 4 major things that happen in the brain when you tell story. So the first one, and this is a fill in the blank here on your workbook, is this neurocoupling that happens. So the story activates parts of your brain that allows for the listener to turn the story into their own experience. And this is the process known as neural coupling. So I have a pretty extensive background in storytelling. I started taking storytelling classes in I think the first one I took was probably in 2008. And I've taken multiple classes and assisted in storytelling classes. And this neural coupling to me is so fascinating because I worked with a master storyteller, and she would tell these stories to groups of, 30 people in a class. And at the end, she would ask, and we were working with fables and fairy tales. So that was the part of the storytelling. You're going to get a lot of some of this training today. Even though we're not working with fables and fairy tales, it still works the same as far as telling stories well. But it was so interesting. She would tell these stories, and then she would ask people at the end of a story, like, who were you in the story? Or what part of that story resonated with you? And at first I thought, like, these people are making this up, right? Like, there's no way. Because people would say things like, I was the eagle soaring over, above and looking down and watching, the fox and the blah, blah, blah. And I'd always be like, there's no eagle in the story. Like, what is going on here? But after going through enough storytelling classes and being around these people who were so interested in learning how to tell fables and fairy tales, that they would really immerse themselves in these stories and find themselves. And over the years, as I have told stories, it's been so interesting to see that that's pretty consistent. This is what our brains do. Our brains love story. The other thing that happens is this mirroring. So I don't know if you've heard of mirror neurons before. When I first learned about mirror neurons in our brains, it literally blew my mind. I was so excited about this because all of a sudden, things that used to feel kind of confusing to me started to make sense. So mirroring is when a listener will have, like, not only will they hear the story, but they'll actually experience it as if they're a part of the story. So this is something where not just to the speaker, like telling the story, but they like see themselves in the story or experience this in the story, these mirror neurons. A good example of this is if you've ever watched, or if you are a huge sports fan, if you've ever watched a sporting event and you can see people in the audience that are, especially at a live event, that get so like engaged, it's almost like you want to say like, hey, you're a fan, you're not even playing on the field, but people get so like, it's almost like they are on the field. And this has to do with this mirroring that our brains do, is that we immerse ourselves in this and we have like things fire in our brain as if it's happening to us. So this is the power of mirroring in your brain and mirror neurons. It's super fascinating to me. So if they hook your brain up to a bunch of things and they show you things, like, this is why you have this experience. It also started to explain to me why, a Hallmark commercial can have me complete, like, in tears and a mess, right? Those really touching, like, I cry easily, but, in addition to that, like, can have me like totally a mess. Or a movie where, I'm like, it drives my husband crazy and he teases me about it because I'll be like so absorbed in the story. And that has to do with mirror neurons. It's like, that's happening to me in this moment, even though I'm just sitting here as like as a watcher. So mirroring is also what's going on in the brain. And then of course there's that great dopamine. I love dopamine. That is where the brain releases dopamine into your system to experience an emotionally charged event, making it easier to remember with greater accuracy. So we love dopamine, and it helps like cement things in our brain when that happens. Like, I can recall it better. And then the last one is this cortex activity that happens. So when you're processing facts, 2 areas of your brain are activated, but a well-told story actually activates additional areas, including your motor cortex, sensory cortex, and your frontal cortex. So when you're just hearing facts, it's like, yeah, 2 parts of my brain are activated. But when story is involved, all these things start firing. So I said at the beginning, I kind of geek out on this part. I love the art and science of storytelling because of what's happening in our brains. So a little bit further down on the page here, let's talk about what happened. So it was really when humans gained the ability to control fire. This is where like it marked a major milestone in like human development. And it's because we would sit around the campfire sharing stories. You know, this was back before, you know, televisions and back before our iPhones and, you know, Netflix and all of this. And I don't know any of you who are big camping fans, if you still do this, sit around and tell story. So when I learned about storytelling and the power of it, and after learning quite a few fables and fairy tales, and I started something with my nieces and nephew, which was story time. So they, growing up, they're now a little bit past the age where they want to do this anymore, but we used to, every time we would get together, they would go, okay, what night is story night, Aunt Nikki? And as a family, we would all sit around, not a campfire, but sit around, and then I would tell one or two stories, and then I would turn it over for them to tell a story. So I would actually tell a fable or a fairy tale. The little kids would get up and like make up their story, but it was super powerful. And it was this great bonding moment as a family too. So that was a huge moment in my life, was to learn how to bring these stories forth. But this idea of how it would cause my family to all get together and gather, because, you know, when we're all in a big house together, oftentimes, you know, multiple people are in different rooms, they're doing different things, having different discussions. But when story time happened, everybody would come into the same room, the adults and the kids, and sit around and participate in storytelling. So this is the, you know, again, a huge change in human development was when fire came into effect. So stories served as instruction, as warning, and as inspiration. Now, they still do to this day, right? When you think of stories and you think of the stories that you were told as a child growing up, there was usually probably either some instruction or maybe some warning and or inspiration in the stories. This is why we love stories. And it's through stories that neuroscientists have confirmed that the human brain is wired for the story, which I think I just demonstrated in the last slide there, but the human brain is wired for story. They actually say that stories are the language of the brain. The language of the brain is story. So if you want to activate the brain, you tell a story. Maybe you already know this stuff. Stories have a unique ability to build connection. And again, if you think about the mirroring, the what's going on with the dopamine release and all of these things, this is how connection is built through stories. And stories boost feelings of trust, compassion, and empathy. Trust, compassion, and empathy. Now I feel like I want to bring in, I took him out for a while. I took this slide out when I was teaching this, but I brought it back because I think it's so important. So I really love this. But Aristotle is known as the father of persuasion. Most of the time when we're telling a story, it's because we want to be persuasive or we want to have influence in some way. So this is why I brought Aristotle back into this training for you guys today. And with persuasion, there are 3 elements that are needed to have a persuasive argument. If you've studied Aristotle, you might already know this. Ethos, which is character and credibility. Logos, which is logic. So the argument must appeal to reason. There's got to be some logic. And then pathos, which is emotion. And Aristotle has shown that ethos and logos are useless without, or useless in the absence of pathos. So if you don't have emotion tied to credibility and logic, you're not going to be persuasive. So there has to be that emotional piece. And now that you know that stories are the language of the brain, instead of trying to convince people of your way of thinking, one of the easiest ways to be persuasive is to do it through story. So if you find yourself in a discussion where you're feeling like, you know, what is wrong with this person? Like, why don't they get this? Maybe it's time for you to bring in a story and see what happens. All right, so let's talk about compelling and interesting. So when you want to be compelling and interesting with a story, there's some things you want to think about, and that is providing details and nuances that bring your story to life and make it personal. So in order to be compelling and interesting, you can tell a story as if you're just giving the data points, as you're just giving the facts. But if you can bring in a little bit of extra detail and a little bit of nuance, and if you can make it personal, whether it's personal to you or personal to the listener, now that's when things start to really like take fire in the brain of the other person. So I'm going to share a story with you, and you'll hear me share stories throughout, but I want to actually share, this is a story from my own experience. And I often get asked, sometimes in interviews or sometimes just in conversation with people, someone would comment about, I'm so surprised, Nikki, that, you just went and did this thing and like, you didn't really know how to do it, but you just went and did it. How do you have that? How do you know that? So I could give some detail around it, right? I could say, well, this happened in my life and this happened. But instead, what I have found is if I share a story, that actually sometimes makes a more impact, that makes it more memorable. So this is a true story. The stories that I tell are generally true. I would tell you if it wasn't. But this story is how one of the ways that I know that I can do things that I've never done before was back in 2003. I was interviewing for a job that I really wanted. And as a matter of fact, I had tried to get the job a year before, and the company that I was working for, the owner of the company said no. I had signed a non-compete, and they let me know that if I went to work for this other company, that I could open myself up to legal action. But a year later, I finally got the owner of the company I was working for to agree to allow for me to apply for this job. Now, it was a multiple interview experience. I don't know if you've ever had to apply for a job with this. The company was it's one of the largest companies in the world, and they have multiple layers of the interview process. And one of the last interviews that I was having was a private interview between myself and the vice president of the division that I wanted to go work for. And in the interview, he asked me some questions that are not standard interview questions. One of them was, do you drink beer? Now you might be thinking, this back in 2003, things have changed a little bit over the years. Probably not a question he could ask today, but back in 2003, he really pushed the boundaries of the questions. He also asked me another one that was even more inappropriate than that, but that's not part of this story. So he asked me, Nikki, do you drink beer? Now you might be wondering, what does this have to do with a job interview and specifically selling technology? So I wasn't working for an alcohol company. I was actually going to work for Hitachi. And I was a little taken aback by this question because I actually didn't drink beer. Not only didn't drink beer, but the taste of beer was something that would actually make my stomach do like a flip-flop. And if I had a sip of beer, it would invoke my gag reflex. That's how anti-beer I was. But now I might have mentioned, I really wanted this job. I'd been trying to get the job for a couple years and even been, tried to interview the year before and was told I couldn't. So this was a big deal. I really wanted this job. So I said to him in the interview when he said, Nikki, do you drink beer? I said, I'll learn. So I get back, and he's like, okay, that's, you got to drink beer to work here. Because this company, this division of the company I was going to go work for, was known kind of as the animal house of the industry. I don't know if you remember that movie. It's from a long, long time ago. Animal House, the fraternity. There was a lot of drinking. There was a lot of crazy party, a lot of annex, like just crazy stuff going on. Well, the division that I was going to go work for was known as the animal house in the industry that I was going to go into. So I go back and I tell, my friends, my family that knew I was interviewing for this job, how did it go? How'd the interview go? And I was like, I think it went really well. I'm feeling really confident. He's basically said, like, he wants me, like I'm the person he wants. And he let me know I need to learn to drink beer. And all of my family and friends were like, oh girl, I'm so sorry. You're not going to be able to get this job. And I was like, what do you mean? I can learn to drink beer. And they're like, you can't learn to drink beer, Nikki. Like, I've been out with you. I know your experience of drinking beer, like it totally grosses you out. And I was like, mind over matter. I am going to learn to drink beer to get this job. So every time I'd go out to eat with my friends and family in the, course of the week, I used to eat out a lot back then, but over the course of the couple weeks, I would order a beer and they'd always be like, you better bring her a Coke too. Like, she's not going to be able to drink that beer, and I would like choke it down. And I got to the place where by the time I started my first weekend, we actually started on a weekend. This job started on a weekend where I actually had to fly to Nebraska because we were going to a Huskers game as a company. And I don't know if you've ever been to a Huskers game or any college game where there's a lot of tailgating involved, but 9:00 in the morning, I get my first beer put into my hand and I'm new to the company. I'm like, I'm the newbie. So here I am, 9:00 in the morning, Saturday morning, Huskers game, getting my beer down without gagging. Super proud of myself, right? So I went on to have a very successful career with this company, and it really shaped who I am as a salesperson, and I love that job. And now, if you ask me, can you do something that people think I can't? I always go, hey, I learned to drink beer. I can do anything. Okay, so little story. Maybe you heard some details. Maybe you heard some nuance. And maybe as you were listening to that story, you heard some ideas of things that brought forth some personal experiences of your own life, possibly, right? Or maybe you're just sitting here thinking like, what the heck did I sign up for? And who is this crazy lady? Like, Nikki has lost her mind this morning. We'll see. All right. But I'm going to give you a little assignment here. So here's what I want you to do. First, there's two things. I want you to write down the details of a story. Now, you can use my story. It's the one you just heard. Or if you're like, I don't want to talk about drinking beer, that's fine. Pick a different story. And I want you to write down the details of a story that really stood out to you. What were the main details that caught your attention? Okay. And then this is on page 4, by the way, where you write down the details. And then on page 5, I want you to make a list of 5 things that you think a story needs in order to capture your attention. So think about the things that are interesting to you, and I want you to write down the 5 things that a story needs to capture your attention. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this. So we're going to come back at 9:32, and we're going to discuss this as a group, okay? So you'll have time to share during that. So take these 5 minutes, do these 2 parts of this exercise, and then we'll come back together. All right, come on back as a group, and let's talk about what are some things. First of all, anybody have what's something that really stood out as far as detail or nuance in a story? Could be the story that I told, or could be another story. Please just unmute yourself and speak up.
Nikki, in your story, the detail about the time of the morning, the 9 a.m. detail, that was great, pretty hilarious. And that was important to your story. I mean, this is Animal House we're talking about. So
yeah. Now, if you think about it, you could tell that story without that little detail, but it is those little tiny things sometimes that really stand out to the other person. So just notice that. Anybody else have one? Thanks, Laura.
I do. My sister told me a story about a canoe trip she did when she was in college.
Yeah.
And they ended up stranded on an island because the current was too strong for them to go back home. And they had to carry their canoes to the long end of the island. And So that was one image. Things that she said that created strong images are what really stayed with me.
Okay, good. Yeah, perfect. One more. Hi, Kim.
Whitney, hi. I'm always, I'm sure as you know, tuned into the physical aspect. So when you said the gag reflex.
Okay. Yeah. So adding those little things. Now you have to be careful sometimes, right? Because like I could actually like gag. It doesn't take much, but that might like then make somebody else gag too. So think about those little things. Okay, now let's talk about what are the things that you think a story needs in order for it to be interesting and memorable to you. So what are those things that capture your attention in a story? If you just unmute yourself, I want to hear those from you. Stacy posted hers. Thanks, Stacy. Stacy posted hers in the chat box too. So if you haven't seen those, I'm just going to read them because they're here. So she likes humor, a happy customer, a creative or unusual solution, a little drama, it's good, right? And something almost unbelievable. I love that answer, by the way.
I think that it needs to have some sort of like a tension or something that makes you go, well, what happened? So whether that's the drama part or that type of sort of tension.
Awesome. Good. Thank you. Who else?
I like it when it has vulnerability and humility, like somebody shares something that requires them to be humble. It draws me in.
Yeah.
Also, humor, visual details, kind of like Rose said, like I want to picture something.
Yeah.
An emotional connection and relevance. Whatever they're telling needs to be relevant to whatever point that they're either trying to make or that they're following up on. Because if I hear a story and I'm like, okay, so what? Like, I don't care, then it doesn't feel memorable.
Yeah.
So it needs to feel relevant.
Yeah, relevant is important. Yeah. Thanks, Holly. Laura, I saw you too. You had something to add there.
Yeah, emails that tend to hook me in, whether it's an email or a podcast episode, is I like to see the unbelievable, amazing result first, and then get the backstory, then get the how, then get the story leading up to that point.
Okay.
That's something that always grabs my attention.
Now, there's a place in your workbook, by the way, I'm sorry I didn't comment on this, for you to write some of these answers that you're hearing from the other participants, because that is some good feedback for you when you're organizing a story. So think about what was shared here, like this idea of a little bit of drama, a little bit of humor. You know, Holly talked about the vulnerability piece, or that, like, you know, Crystal, like, what's going to happen? And then Laura saying that sometimes she wants to hear the, like, what's the, like, really awesome thing first, and then the story comes. So there's multiple ways to unfold a story, and just look for, you know, you're going to find your rhythm and the way it works for you. And most importantly is, like, how do the other people respond? And what I will say about storytelling, you'll hear me work little stories in constantly, especially those of you who've worked with me for a while. You know that I work a lot of story in when I'm coaching and when I'm teaching. And a lot of times it'll be a year or 2 years later, someone will come back to me and they'll repeat part of a story. And oftentimes they will add to the story, or they'll say, like, you said this, or this happened to you, Nikki, even though I don't actually say that in the story, because they'll add some of these extra details. When you start to give them some detail and some nuance, they will start to, like, paint a more vivid picture for themselves. Does anybody else have one they want to talk about or speak up about? If you haven't said something yet, please feel free. Lori Nichols.
Good morning.
Hi, friend.
So, you know, I've noticed, I hadn't really thought about the fact that I'm telling a story, but I got a fantastic new engagement at the beginning of the year. And I think what really got them was a couple of the anecdotes that I used about clients that I was either already working with or that I worked with last year. And I noticed, like, most of my practice right now is men, and this is 2 women.
Yeah.
And I as I was talking with them during the discovery call, which I didn't know when it got scheduled that it was a discovery call. They reached out via LinkedIn. It was kind of okay. But there were certain words that they would just go, oh, and they were very verbal about it. And I'm kind of like, what's happening? But now it's like listening to you talk, it's like, I was telling stories.
Yeah. So that's also some good awareness to have, is what are those things that cause people to have any type of physical reaction, whether it's a lean in, whether it's like a noise, like or, like, oh, any of that stuff. The other thing is like when their eyes open wider, that's usually a good sign. Like they're totally in, like what's going to happen next. Right. That makes me want to tell a story, but we're going to keep going. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again, and we are going to move on to the next section here. Give me a second. All right, now please turn to page 6, and we're going to talk about motivate and influence. And we're actually going to spend the rest of our time on this section. This to me is a critical section of storytelling. And it has to do with when telling a story, you need to be able to answer this question: what's my outcome? And when I think about outcome, to me, it's like taking into account what's the main reason for sharing the story. So you might be asking, how might the story lead a prospect or a client to making a decision and or having a better understanding of something? There's a lot of times to pull out story, and if you're feeling like people aren't getting it or you're not quite connecting in the way that you want, oftentimes story is a great place to go next. And this idea of what's my outcome in sales, I teach this constantly. Like, I want you to know in every sales conversation, what's my outcome? Like, where am I going next? And so same with story. We've got to understand what is involved. Where do I want to go? And when I'm thinking about outcome, I always think, I keep hearing some background noise. Would you mute yourself if you're not muted, please? Just for the sake of the recording. Okay, so there are 4 potential outcomes when telling a story. Sometimes a story will have multiple outcomes, by the way, and we're going to get to that when we start building your story database. But the idea is credibility. Like, I'm telling a story to establish some credibility. Could be for me, it could be for my company, it could be for my product. There's multiple reasons to do it. The second outcome is to have influence, right? In sales, when you want to have influence, like the person who has the most influence, right? Makes it easy to earn somebody's business. So influence, to move people into action. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about all of these, so it's coming. The next is common ground. An outcome oftentimes is to establish common ground. And then the fourth is in place of facts or truth. So I'm going to dig into all of these much deeper, and you're going to get some chance to work with some of these things and start to practice the way that you might form a statement to either establish credibility, to have influence, to establish common ground, or in place of facts or truths. Okay? So we're going to start with credibility. This is how to motivate and influence people. So with credibility, you tell stories to demonstrate your credibility instead of giving a bulleted list of your accomplishments and or services. So it's a way for you to paint a more vivid, more memorable image in the mind of the listener by doing it in a little bit more of a story form than instead of just giving a bulleted list. Like, I've done this, right? So here's an example. I'm going to use my stuff throughout. And the reason I'm using my stuff is because I want you to then go and put your stuff instead. So my stuff won't apply to you, and this is why I'm using it, because I want you to apply your stuff instead. So here's a sample list of accomplishments and or services that I offer, right? An accomplishment: I've been in sales for 25 plus years. I'm a master certified practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming. I offer a training on emails that convert. I work with clients on business development because I have an extensive business development background, and I teach storytelling workshops, right? Now, if somebody saw that, they might go like, all right, but could I put those in a conversation or in an email or on a podcast, or, you know, however you're getting your information out to prospective clients, but instead, could I tell it in a little bit of a more story form? So these are just one sentence lines, and I'm going to give you a chance. I want you to go and actually do this for yourself too in just a second. So examples of credibility statements. So using that first one there about being in sales for 25 plus years, instead I could say, you know, years ago when I was working on closing a large deal with NASA, and then I could continue on and make a point, right? So this establishes some credibility. Oh, Nikki has sold to NASA. By the way, when I started my business, I never even used to tell this story. And then I told it one time to a coach, and she's like, why don't you tell everybody that you sold to NASA? Because to me, it was like, it's just another sale, like to anybody, right? But so now to use it as a credibility builder, you have these as well in your back pocket. For an example, for the second one here, you know, a VIP client brought in $100,000 in new business in 2019 using my business development strategy. And then I could go on and talk about, so this is maybe this fits with Laura, like this idea of like planting at the front end, like what's possible for somebody. Now, again, only say things that are true, but this might spur somebody's interest more than saying I have an extensive business development background experience. Instead, talk about how I helped a client bring in $100,000 in new business in 2019. Okay. Or I could say, you know, as someone who has over 1,200 classroom hours in NLP studies, I've been able to. So that's different than saying Master Certified Practitioner of NLP, which might not mean that much to people, especially if you've never heard the term neuro-linguistic programming before. But when you hear that somebody has 1,200 classroom hours, it's safe to assume, maybe, you might disagree with me, but maybe if I heard somebody has had 1,200 classroom hours in something, I'm going to assume they have a pretty good base of knowledge, right? Maybe I won't say that they're an expert, but I'm definitely going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they definitely know more about it than I do. Okay? So now, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take a few minutes and write down a list of your accomplishments and our services. So it could just be, 3 to 5 little bullet points here. This is on page 7 of your workbook. Write down list of accomplishments, and then I want you to craft credibility statements out of 1, 2, or 3 of them. Okay? And I'm going to give you how much time am I going to give you? I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this. So don't sit there and lament over it. Just take one and just test it, right? Like the first thing that comes to mind. Like, what could you say instead of just the accomplishment? How could you put it in a statement that has a little bit of a story to it? Okay. So 5 minutes, it's 9:48. We're going to come back at 9:53, and then we'll do some Q&A around this section. Go ahead. Okay, come on back. How did it go? Who has a question or one they want to even share they're excited about? But happy to take questions and or shares here. Please just unmute yourself and speak up.
Nikki, can I share one?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Can I say I have been a florist for over 15 years and have helped made over 700 brides' dream wedding come true? Is that?
So I might reframe it just a little bit and put as a florist who has worked with over 700 brides to make their weddings come true in the last 15 years, blah, 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 blah. Right. So as a florist, the 700 and then the 15 years, okay, that's just a suggestion, but it needs to roll off your tongue string. So whatever feels most comfortable to you, but good job. I love that. That's perfect, right? That's super interesting. Great credibility builder. Like set that number 700, like, wow. Right? It's amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, good job.
I've got one, Nikki. This is Eileen.
Hi, Eileen. And then Teresa. I saw her hand too. Go ahead, Eileen.
I do HR. I'm an HR consultant.
Yeah.
So my story would be like, I remember the first time, the shock that I experienced when I learned of all the laws and the things that employers had to have in place and what they're to do.
You guys feel that? Like when she talks about the shock of all, like, I feel like, yeah, that's would be shocking to me too. I like it.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Teresa.
Okay, so as a financial professional who has guided clients through 3 decades of market ups and downs.
Yeah, 3 decades. Super powerful little paint that picture. I love it.
Thanks.
Yeah, good job. Anybody else have one they want to share?
I have one, and I feel like it needs more. I need to learn more of the how do you start the sentence. Right?
Okay.
So, okay. Opportunities can show up at any time. I was speaking at a conference in Germany when I was invited to speak at a conference in China. It feels like it just needs some edge or something.
Okay, so when I think about, so I'm going to ask you, like, so again, that's a credibility builder, right? That you're talking about. I think actually you could say it. I think it might be the inflection of your voice might make a difference. Be like, it's always so fun to see how opportunities can just show up at any time. Like I was speaking in Germany when I got my opportunity to first speak in China.
Okay.
It's the same. I mean, I said it the same. It's the same sentence. It's just a little bit more of like inflection, I think.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you.
What do you think, Rose? Do you like that?
I like that. I like that. Yeah.
Now, when you're saying, okay, so we're going to get to like telling a story well, but in week 3, so just, I'm going to comment on it here that when you're telling story, we want it to have this like authentic, it's almost like it's just a thought that just came to you. So your body language and your voice quality has to show up with that a little bit. Yeah. So even though what's going to happen is you're going to be telling the same story over and over and over again, like, right? Like I feel like you probably all feel this in your business too. Like if I had $1 for every time I say this one statement, I'd be so rich, right? Because we say the same things over and over. But when we're talking to somebody, they're hearing it for the first time. So we want to say it as if like, it's always so surprising how opportunities can just show up in the most interesting ways. Like it was when I was speaking in Germany that I got my first opportunity to speak in China. Like I act like I'm just thinking of this now. Like, isn't this interesting? Right?
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I saw
Nikki,
Holly. I saw Laura. Yeah. Holly and Denise.
Perfect.
Oh, sure. I got about 4 accomplishments written without any credibility statements, so I'm happy to hear your input. So, worked with companies like Amazon, Apple, Toyota, and Ford, downsizing their employees' homes for corporate relocation.
Yeah.
Traveled to other states to declutter whole homes in 4 days. Taken tubs of random papers and created neatly organized systems with very little time or input from the client.
Yeah.
So how would I start a sentence or use, this is the part I struggle with the most, like bragging on myself or like creating credibility for myself.
Yeah. So if you were talking to somebody and you think like, what would be kind of interesting to them, you could say something like, it was when I was hired by Amazon to help their executives relocate that I first discovered this tip that I'm just about to give you now. Right? Like I could drop in you probably can't say Amazon, Apple, Toyota, and I think you said one more and it left
Ford. Yeah.
Ford. Yeah. But you could say, it's been fun to work with companies like Ford and Toyota with their executives, right? Like, especially if you're talking to somebody who's interested in cars, right? Like think about the person that you're talking to. So you're not going to necessarily get them all in, but you want to get something in that plants that seed, that paints that picture. And sometimes you're going to use the more, like some of the biggest deals that I ever closed, like multi-million-dollar deals. If I dropped the name of the company, you guys would be like, so what, right? But when I say things like when I sold to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, then all of a sudden people are like, what? Or NASA, or like Hewlett Packard, or like those little things have more impact, even though they weren't some of the largest deals that I ever closed, right? So pick and choose those moments. Okay, Laura, and then Denise, and then we're going to keep going.
Yeah, just an observation. As I was working through my credibility statements and then listening to the other people who are here today, I thought these are such great opportunities for building curiosity. Like in your course, in your membership, you have a section in there on how to create curiosity, those curiosity conversations. And I thought, wow, these are all ways to do that, because every person who shared here today, I'm thinking, oh, and then what happened? What else? And that's exactly what we want, right? So I got, that's my aha moment from this part so far. Yeah, so this is definitely a planting seed type opportunity when you do this. Stories are such a great way to plant seeds for your business, for the work that you do, because again, people want to identify in the story. So they think, well, I'm an executive, like I should hire Holly to do this, or I work for this company and maybe it's not Ford, but it is such and such, right? Like they find themselves in the story. You guys are moving around on my screen. So now I was trying to find Denise. Hi, Denise.
Oh. Hey there. So I'm in the same industry as Holly. So I've been on the A&E Hoarder Show 3 times, which I can say as an organizer who's worked on the A&E Hoarder Show, it's really difficult to overwhelm me or make my jaw drop, which is helpful. So for complimentary assessments, people are like, oh yeah, she's seen everything. But at the same time, that is not my ideal client.
Okay, so think it like also be strategic and don't drop things that you just now like don't want to talk about and or you don't want to be known for. But that is really interesting and compelling and really builds credibility for you, Denise, as somebody who's been on the show. What was the name of the show?
Hoarders.
I'm sorry, my brain just didn't hear it. I thought you said hoarders, but then I was afraid to say it if that wasn't what you said, because I was like, that might be a negative. Okay, so and you might even say, it was on my 3rd time on the Hoarder Show for A&E. I don't know if you know that show, but it was when I was on there for the 3rd time that this happened. Because see how I just said it was on the 3rd time. I didn't say I've been on it 3 times. I say it was on the 3rd time. Because now people are like, oh, she has multiple appearances on the Hoarder Show.
Yeah. But it just, but it's not on my website. That's not an ideal client in any way. But it does help. It like quiets the audience when I come to a microphone. Yeah,
because it's interesting. And there's a little bit of like notoriety, a little bit of like famous people are on TV, that you're famous, Denise, right? Like it helps build that credibility piece to it. And even if you didn't want it on your website, you could say something like, as someone who has appeared on the A&E, Hoarder Show, I can promise you that you will not surprise or shock me. And even though that's not my main source of business, I now am able to take these experiences and help you be more impactful with making decisions about what you're going to keep and let go of, or something like that. And now I just painted the story, but I told it, like I built that credibility in there.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Was there anybody else who was like, why didn't Nikki call on me? Like, I want to keep going for the sake of time, but at the same time, I always want you guys to have a chance too. If you haven't spoken up yet and want to.
Nikki.
Hi.
I'll share mine quickly because I just put it out in my video.
Okay.
About how for 20 years my husband and I have painted all our own spaces, and that it's not a secret that I would wait till everyone left the house in the morning and then I would go back into the room and repaint it. And then another 2 weeks would go by and they'd all leave in the morning and then I'd go back into the space and repaint it again, just because I wanted to change the color and I like to paint. So it hopefully establishes me as someone that A, knows how to paint, over 20 years of painting and repainting spaces, and then also has a lot of experience in color selection because I keep changing the colors in my house. So it's interesting that I just did this yesterday and posted it, and now we're talking about it. So I'm excited that it's actually, I hit some of the things that we talked about already, so I'm happy.
Okay, good. I will also say, in case this is helpful for anybody, and specifically for you, Susan, but any of you, is that you can actually tell the same story, but have a different context of like a different outcome of telling it. So one of the outcomes that I could hear in that story, it would also be as a way to give your clients permission that they may change their mind. And hey, you're totally okay with it because you change yours. You know, like it helps build that, so that when we get to common ground, like this is another way to establish that too. Same story, but it will work in multiple ways. All of you have stories that will work in multiple ways. Okay. All right, let's keep going. So now we're going to talk about influence. So a way to move people into action is by telling a story that'll influence and encourage them to take action. So here are some examples. We'll see. Now, if you read one of my examples and you're like, I don't get it, that's okay. Look for the next one. If that one resonates, great. If none of them resonate, we need to talk about it. Like maybe I missed the mark here. I do that sometimes, right? That's okay. But here are some examples of potential influence statements. And then I'm going to give you an opportunity to do this as well. So I might say to somebody, you know, a VIP client once showed up to her VIP day having already earned back her investment. So what's the point of that story? The point of that story, and I actually say this a lot. As a matter of fact, one of my VIPs is on this in this call. I'm wondering if she remembers me saying this when we were doing her discovery. The idea is to plant the seed that people who take action get back the money that they invest in me, right? So it's my way of planting a seed. Many of you who've worked with me for a while know that I always say implementers get results. There's a reason I say that, because when people implement, they get results. And I'm planting the seed, take action and see what happens for you, okay? Another one I might say, you know, the majority of my private coaching clients end up taking part in a masterclass within a year of their program. So I'm like planting a little seed there. I'm sure you guys see it. It's pretty obvious that says like, oh, do I identify, am I a private coaching client of Nikki's? Maybe I should also be thinking about taking a master class. So think about how you can take a statement like that and use it in your own business. Or many of the people in my Sales Maven Society find that it's a safe place to share and ask questions. So again, planting a seed there that like, oh, there's a safe place where I can ask questions. Oh, maybe I should be a part of the Sales Maven Society, right? So you plant these seeds, and this is how you build influence. And again, when I'm thinking about my outcome, and when the outcome is influence and I want people to take action, these are the type of statements that I can use. Okay, so now I want you to create your own. So come up with 3 if you can. Come as many as you can, but 3, you know, between 1 and 3 would be great. Take something that you would say, and how can you phrase it in a way that thinks about getting people to take action, to move, build influence. Okay, I'm going to give you, like, again, 5 minutes to do this. So it's 10:08, so we're going to come back at 10:13, and then we'll do some Q&A again. Go ahead. Okay, come on back. Let's talk about this one. Question, comment, share.
Nikki, can I share?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So I said, seasonal floors and new floors come to my workshop to learn to enhance their techniques and mechanics to create large and impressive floor design for their clients.
Yeah. So when you think about, don't people want impressive designs? So yes, of course they should come to the class. Love it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good job. Who else? Crystal, I saw your hand.
I realized I had to unmute. Sorry. I'm still finessing this, but
Okay.
basically what I'm trying to say is many of my past clients love that they never have to worry about their model home timelines or budgets as they're always met.
That's a good planting of a seed and influence of like, okay, I don't have to worry when I hire her because she's definitely going to meet all of the things that we agreed to. Yeah, I like it.
Thanks.
It works. Denise and then Eileen.
So can you mention like a record? So by opening client's mail, I found $93,000 that the client had no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, so can you throw that in?
Yeah, for sure. Isn't that super powerful? Did you say $93,000?
Yes.
They had no idea. What was it? $93,000. They had no idea what?
They just unopened mail.
Okay. So if I was talking to a client, if one of the services that I was talking about is the fact that we will go through the unopened mail, like, you know, one of the advantages of having us go through the mail for you, your unopened mail, and open it is you'd be surprised at what we found. One time I found for a client $93,000 they had no idea they even had. Like, please come open my mail, Denise. I love it, right? You're getting some head shakes from people too that are like, yeah, super powerful. Eileen? Yeah, you're welcome.
Mine would be the majority of my clients no longer have to wonder, worry, or wing it when they're trying to figure out how to handle a situation with an employee. They've got the answers right there with their employee handbook.
Yeah, okay. This idea of like not having to wing it, worry, all these things because the answers are in the handbook. Yeah, love that.
Okay.
That's powerful. Like it. Did I see another hand? Stacy.
Hey.
Hi.
So one of mine is most of the members of the Lifestyle Design Studio are introverts who prefer self-guided learning, but they also like to be able to connect with a group when they need support. So my focus is mostly on introverts. So I don't know if you have any suggestions for that.
I think you spoke right to it. I mean, this idea of that the lifestyle design studio is for the introvert who, you know, likes to learn at their own pace, but also when they do want to connect, there's that option for them, right? Like, I think the way you said it was perfect. And it plants that seed. Who is the lifestyle design studio for? Yeah, which is the point. I'm assuming that's the point, right? Yeah, I love it. Good job. Teresa.
Okay, so over 90% of my my first year clients have maintained their relationship and trust our long-term collaboration.
Okay, let's see. I like it, but I'm wondering if we can strengthen it just a little bit.
Okay.
Please say it to me one more time.
Sure. I said over 90% of my first year clients, but I could say over 90% of my 15-year clients.
That's stronger.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Yeah, so much stronger, right?
Okay.
Or you could say 90% of my clients. No, that wouldn't work. Let me think.
Would you
I
say
wonder if
something
you
like
could say
past 15 years?
Yeah. In the past 15 years, I'm trying to think of, hold on, let me think about like what's the seed that we're trying to plant
Yeah,
here?
what the seed is that clients trust me over a long period of time.
Yeah. Okay, so you could say 90% of my clients are so confident in their first year of working with me that 15 years later, they're still a client.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay.
Because we're planting this seed of like, come give me a year to build this trust with you. you're going to stay with me, and 15 years later, we'll still be working together.
Yeah, that's what I want to get across.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Is there one more? Otherwise, we're going to keep going. Okay, we're going to keep going. Here we go. Let's talk about common ground. We are now on page 9 of your workbook. So a story told to establish common ground may either be between you and the listener, or the listener and your other like-minded clients. So between you and the listener, or the listener and your other like-minded clients, or could be also your ideal client, thinking about what Denise had said earlier too. Like, think about your ideal client. So here are some potential statements, and then you're going to have an opportunity to do this for yourself. By the way, I just want to comment here that you may hear, and like as I go through this, you might go, well, I could use that same statement that I used for influence. Yes, absolutely. You will find a lot of times that stories can fit into different outcomes. And that's, I think I said this earlier, like, you know, think about how you can bring forth these stories, like with Susan's story, that it can do different things, and that's okay. It's just understanding what's the outcome that I'm telling, because that might help me make more emphasis on a certain part of a story and less, in certain areas too. So that's what we want to think about. So examples of common ground statements are things like, confidence in the selling process is one of the most common things my clients want to work on. That's that common ground between this person and my other clients. This is truthfully probably the number one thing that people hire me around, is this idea of building confidence in the selling process. Or if I was talking to a corporate client that was looking at me to do some training, I might say, my 2 most popular training modules for sales teams, or that sales teams are hiring me for right now, are this and this. This is a great planting seed, common ground type thing, because a lot of times people want to know, what are others doing? I'm thinking, Seishu, for you specifically, as a photographer, this is a really great way for you to frame for your clients when they're thinking about purchasing, like, what are the clients' purchase? This idea of having wall art, not just purchasing photos, but actually purchasing wall art for you. This is a place for you to establish some common ground for them. People oftentimes feel confident or more confident in making a decision when they know that others are making similar type decisions. Okay. So, here's one that I would use for establishing common ground with a client who struggles with the idea of sales or being seen in a selling process. So I might say, I'm actually quite shy. The idea of having a whole room of people focused on me makes me want to have the ground open up and actually swallow me. This is true. And one of the ways that I get around this is that I teach state management. And it's called the NLP mandala. It's a game changer in how I show up in the room. And it's something that I talk with my clients about often. And as a matter of fact, I'm actually teaching it tomorrow to my Sales Maven Society. Right? This is that common ground type statement. So now it's your turn. You get to go play and come up with some common ground statements, little stories, little swirls. That's how I learned them. Anytime you tell, even if it's a one sentence, or sometimes even if it's a phrase, it's like a little tiny story. It's like a super satisfying. So I love this idea of creating swirls in your conversation with people. So I want you to come up with 3 of your own common ground type statements. And if you don't have one yet, that's okay. Look for some of the things that are challenges or concerns for your potential clients, and then put a statement together that helps them go like, oh, okay, I'm in the right place. Hiring you is the right thing to do because you understand or you work with people that have similar concerns to me. Okay, so work on some common ground type statements. It is 10:24. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do this one too. So we're going to come back at 10:29. Go ahead. Okay, let's come on back. Seishu had a great question. So I'm going to read the question and then I'm going to give an answer for it. So he says, is there a way to figure out what kind of story will appeal to a particular type of client for some common ground? Like for some common ground is going to sway them, but for others, it might be credibility. So how do you gauge which story to present? So think about your outcome first and foremost. Like, what do you most want to convey? What's your purpose in telling the story? And then pick based on that is my answer. And to build off of this, one of the great things about storytelling is oftentimes people will make sense of the story on their own. And so we don't necessarily have to be overly obvious about what the point of the story is, because our brains love to associate and make sense of things. Like our brains are always trying to figure out, how does this relate to me? What's the point of this? What should I be taking away? What should I know here? Now, it may cause them to ask some questions, and based on their questions, that might spur a different story for you. But I would say ultimately trust your instincts, your outcome. What's the point in telling this story? And then go ahead and tell it and see how people respond. Every once in a while, and not just every once in a while, like because I tell stories all the time. Sometimes I tell stories and people, like some people will be like, oh, I loved that story, Nikki. That was so great. And somebody else will be like, I hated that story. Right? And it's okay. So I don't beat myself up about like, oh, I told the wrong story here. It's just, it didn't resonate with that person. That's okay. I try to make it resonate. So one of the things that I often do when I'm picking a story is I think, what do I know about this person? Like maybe I don't know a lot, but sometimes I know a little, right? Like, what do I know about this person? And what story might work here for them, might help them get to a deeper understanding, might help make a connection for them in some way, like their brain to connect to a strategy or a structure. So I just tell the story. Oftentimes I tell stories totally unplanned. Like I don't necessarily plan ahead. I have a couple stories that I plan to tell you guys throughout the next 3 weeks that we get to spend together. But oftentimes I just let the stories come up when they do. And I just trust that it's going to resonate with somebody. And so I just tell the story and I see how it goes. Sometimes it lands and sometimes it doesn't. And it's okay. And I don't like sit and resonate, like lament about it. I just move on. So that's what I would say. It's kind of a general answer, but it is true. Okay. Who has a question or one they want to share about this? Common ground. Susan? And then Teresa? Oh, you're muted, friend.
Okay.
There you are.
I love this one for me because a lot of the misconception about decorating is that someone will come in and ask people to get rid of everything that they have. And it has happened to some of my clients now, and they'll say to me, no, I'm not sure. I have a few pieces that I like. And I will say to them, and it's true right now, I actually am working with a client who is a widow and he downsized from a house to a condo, a co-op rather. And he was concerned about, some of the pieces that were his wife's. And I, told him I actually specialize in mixing clients' pieces that they love with some new things and refreshing using pieces that they already have. And I was able to make the pieces that were sentimental to him the focus of the design when we did the redesign in his space. Yeah. So he's thrilled that I didn't come swooping in and ask him to just get rid of everything that was his wife's. And I actually utilized every single piece that was important to him and made it the focus of the space as the most important thing that we work with first. It was the priority for me to get those pieces in first and decorate around them. And he's thrilled.
Yeah.
So that created, I think, a common ground with certain people that are afraid that we're going to come in and ask them to get rid of everything.
Yeah. So that story actually resonates kind of in a couple ways from an outcome standpoint, because it's definitely a common ground story, but it does also build to your credibility. The fact that this is something that you specialize in, right? So there's a credibility piece of it. And there's even a little bit of an influence piece of like being able to share that you've done this with other people, that you've been able to make this work for them and that they've been happy. That's an influence piece too. So again, I mentioned that sometimes you can look at a story and go, this story works for credibility, it works for influence, and it works for common ground. I rarely find that one story is going to work for all four things. We haven't talked about facts or truth yet. You may have an example of one. It's okay for it to have a multi-purpose outcome and share different. And again, it's what do you emphasize in the story as to what you're most trying to do with the client. So you might tell the same story, but you just really highlight or go a little deeper about certain areas in the story. You give a little bit more nuance, a little more detail in this area, whereas you might skim over some of the other stuff too. So just think about that in the telling of the story. So good. Anybody else have? Oh, Teresa, I saw your hand too. Thanks.
Okay, so I want to check this one out.
Okay.
So 2 important elements that I teach women who are nervous about investing is the importance of a knowledgeable skill set as well as the proper mindset.
Okay. So I feel like I like it, and I'm just wondering if it's a common ground story, there needs to be either something about how this was like something that you experienced or something that has to do with other clients, right? So you could say there are 2 main areas that clients often report as their biggest takeaways from working with me. And it's this idea around knowledge and this idea around mindset around money.
Okay.
I really shortened it there. So that's because I can't remember all the details of what you said, but
right.
So now we're talking about that common ground between this particular person and other clients.
Yeah.
I don't know if I heard that so much in the beginning, because you said I teach. I don't think that I teach is a common ground type story.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing wrong with what you said, just to be really clear.
Sure, I get you. No, I get you. Yeah, the common ground I was searching for was women who are nervous about investing.
Yeah.
Because that is the common feeling.
So you might say, like, I tend to work with women who are nervous about investing, and these are the 2 main areas that we focus on first. Now I think it's a little bit more of like, do I relate? Am I one of those women or not?
Okay, I hear that. Okay, thank you.
Good. Anybody else have one they want to? Hi, Stella.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Okay, so here's ours. We're hormone balancing and weight loss. So that's kind of different to everyone. So I kind of like to start with, so what does feeling better mean to you? Is it sleep, energy, libido, being slimmer, just feeling in control? And learning how simple, natural shifts can help you naturally achieve what is most important to you.
Yeah. So now if you ask a question, you want to let them answer it, and then you want to relate your answer to their answer. Like, so if you say, is it sleep? Is it weight loss? Is it, I can't remember now some of the others.
Sleep, weight loss, energy, libido.
Energy, libido. Yeah. And they're like, it's stuff, I'm just going to say, because I'm a libido, right? Like that's like, right? So yeah. Okay. So
it's for all of us.
Yeah. That's libido. And so oftentimes the clients that is their main concern, here is what they experience over the course of the, first month, second month, third, and then you give kind of an example. Now that's really common ground.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So, but if I'm doing this in a presentation, when I didn't ask them maybe to think, think about what is most important to you. And then, but then if I'm one-on-one, I could literally say, they could answer the question.
Yeah, even in a presentation though, where you could give this like bulleted list is what you're giving, I might still pick one that's the most common and share a little bit more of like a little bit of a story. So if it's you know, it's sleep, it's libido, it's weight loss, it's, you know, now I'm forgetting the others that you said, right? And so you might say, so, and actually this might actually be fun for people. Libido is probably one that's gonna like, maybe people are like, I wouldn't say it, but I want to hear what she has to say about it. So you might actually pick that one because that's going to draw people in. You go, you know, the one that people sometimes are hesitant to mention is libido. And yet we had a client recently who that was their main concern. Here's what they were able to experience. Now we have these same impacts for clients with the other issues too, but this is just one example, right? Now I just told this little story and they're like, do I relate to that or not?
Okay.
Yeah, draw them in.
And I've actually got a great story. There's someone that had this super hot husband. And we got to see him, so we got to see how super hot he really was. And we're like, really? You had a libido problem?
Right? So that's a great story because that is so relatable to people who are like, well, one, hopefully you think that you're, whether everybody else hopefully you think your spouse or your significant other is, you know, super attractive to you, whatever. Like, right? And so people might be surprised, like even people who the whole world thinks is like, wow, how could you have a problem with this? Like, this person's so beautiful. Well, we all think our significant other is beautiful, and this can still be a common concern. And here's how we were able to solve it for him. And this is what we do with our clients. Now that really draws people into you. I love that for you, by the way. I think that's super fun. Jolyn?
Okay.
Did I say your name right, by the way?
I'm sorry about that. Yeah, it's Jolyn. Yeah.
Jolyn.
It's, yeah.
Okay.
Or Jojo, whatever. Okay.
Well, help me because I want to say it right. You're important to me. I want to know that I say your name right.
Thanks. Okay. So here we go.
Okay.
Whether you're facing a serious condition, recovering from physical injury or surgery, or dealing with mental and emotional issues, yoga therapy can help you on your way back to vitality and wholeness.
So now give an example, like take it one step further. Now, again, I know we're just talking about these first initial statements, but there's this, like sometimes if you give like a list, if it's this, if it's this, if it's this, it's too hard for somebody to go like, my thing is this. So I would pick one of those. So you could say it the way you said it. And then I would pick one and say, for instance, you know, clients that are struggling with recovering from injuries, here's how we've seen the impact. You know, it's shortened their recovery time by, you know, a significant amount. And overall, they oftentimes report feeling better than even before they had the injury, right?
Great.
Like I'm making up story for you,
yeah.
but
okay.
Yeah. But I like where you're going with this. Like it's super interesting and compelling to have these categories. And we just need to build off at least one of the category with a little bit more story. Now, again, we're going to be playing with this over the next couple weeks. So you'll be able to dive deeper into this one. And actually, I think like hold on to this, like highlight this for you, because this will be one that you'll use going forward. Definitely probably in the first expertise type stories.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Thanks for speaking up. Appreciate it. Okay. Brenda, I saw your
Yeah, one really quick.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about this. I liked your example. How about, I really struggled with forgiving my ex, and even thinking of being in another unhealthy relationship made me want to go be a nun. Learning this 5-step forgiveness process has been a life changer and provided a simple way to stop struggling and be able to create healthy relationships or be in a healthy relationship.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be, that is a common ground story. Those of us who have been in relationships that we haven't enjoyed, right, hasn't been healthy. And probably some of us have even said, I think I'd be better off just being celibate or being a nun or right. Like, I think that's relatable. Yeah. I think that's definitely common ground. Okay. Yeah. It's going to attract a certain people. Right. I will say, being a nun, think about that though. being a nun or being celibate might give you a wider range of people that would relate to it versus being a nun. Just something to think about.
Okay.
It may or may not be true. If you guys disagree, like send Brenda a private message and say, no, I love that. Like, right. Or if you like the idea of being like, when you think about a bad breakup, do you think like, I think I'll just be alone? Like for me, I thought I'll just become a cat lady. Then it turns out I'm really not a cat lady, so that didn't work, right? Yeah. Okay. Kim, I saw your hand. Did I? No?
Yes.
Hi.
I wrote it in there in case the connection isn't good, but so I'll read it. I consider myself a perpetual student and I love to learn. I can easily spend more time on research than in my business. One of the ways I get a handle on this is a strategy I teach on time orientation. It's called ROAD, Results Oriented Activities +1 DARE, and it's been a game changer in how I've been able to implement more effectively or just implement more.
Yep. That's a great common ground. Yes. Good job.
Okay.
Love it. Love it. Okay, we're going to keep going. We have one more little section and then we are going to wrap up the day, believe it or not. That went super fast. Okay, let's talk about the last outcome here, facts or truths. So we're going to tell a story to keep from overwhelming or frankly boring people with facts or truths. So here's a couple examples. So a sample list of facts or truths. And then I'm going to show you how it's brought into story. Okay, so messages delivered as stories can be up to 22 times more memorable than just facts. That's a bulleted like fact, right? Not all NLP master practitioner training is created equal. Also a fact. Voice quality is 38% of the overall communication, whereas the words you choose make up only about 7% of all communication. Using the Maven study, fact. Okay, facts or truths. Now looking how we can take those facts and truths and wrap them up into a little bit of story to make them more memorable. So I actually wonder, have you guys ever heard the story of the naked truth? Those of you who've taken storytelling from me before are probably saying, yes, Nikki, we've heard this story. Those of you who haven't, maybe you haven't heard the story. This is a fable, by the way. So the story is about the naked truth and how the naked truth felt so compelled to share its message that it would travel from town to town. These are in a long time ago. The naked truth would travel from town to town and want to share its message. And it would come into town, and frankly, it would scare the town folk. They were shocked by the nakedness of truth showing up into their town, and they wouldn't even give the naked truth time to share what it knew, because they would turn and run the other way thinking like, what's going on and why is the naked truth in our town? So the naked truth, after years of doing this, at one point started to feel overwhelmed and found itself sitting on a rock, frankly, crying, because it had something so important to share with people, a message that it felt so compelled to put out into the world, and yet nobody would even give it the time of day. So as it sits on the road or on the rock crying, along comes Parable, also known as story. Parable shows up and, sees the naked truth crying and says, what's going on? And, how can I help you right now? And so the naked truth shares, it laments about how it's got this message that's so important that the world needs to hear. And every time it goes to the town folk, it gets run out of town because people run away, or sometimes they even scream obscenities and, how inappropriate it is for the naked truth to show up in its town. And Parable thinks, so interesting, because I show up into town and people gather around. As a matter of fact, they make like an evening of it. They gather around and they want to hear from me. And so Parable started thinking like, what's the difference between myself and the naked truth? Well, one thing is, I show up and I'm wrapped in these fine silk fabrics with these bright, vibrant colors. And I don't just like tell a story. I like swirl a little story out of my mouth. Like, I want it to be so delicious to the listener's ears that they just can't wait for the next little bite to come. So Parable thinks, well, maybe the Naked Truth just needs a little bit of what I have. So spend some time with the Naked Truth and share some of its fine fabric and wraps it up in these beautiful, vivid color and the silk fabric, and even teaches it a little bit more about the delivery of its message, and then sends the Naked Truth on its way. And all of a sudden, when the Naked Truth now shows up, well, it's no longer naked, and now it's just truth, showing up to share with the town folk its important message. All of a sudden, people want to hear it. That is the story of the Naked Truth. Okay, so here we go. Taking these facts or truths and putting a little story around it makes it more memorable. Here's what I would ask you to think about. What were some of the things of the story that I just told that really stood out for you? And you might even write them down. And I'm going to ask you some questions here in just a second. But now that I've shown you the slide, I'm going to go through these first. So, for example, my fact or truth was that stories are 22 times more memorable than facts or truths. So in one study where they had speakers who some shared statistics and the others shared story, they found that only 5% of the audience could remember the statistics that were shared. And yet 63% of the audience, the listeners, could repeat parts or elements of the story. Now, the second fact or truth was, I said, not all NLP master certifications are created equal, right? So my little bit of a story here is, most people with the same certification that I have less than 200 classroom hours, whereas I actually have 1,200 as a student, as an assistant, and even as a teacher in NLP. And then the third fact or truth that I had up there for you was that only 38% of communication is your voice quality, whereas only 7% is the words. So here's a little swirl, by the way, because there's not a lot of story. It's just it's a phrase. You know that saying? It's not what she said, it's how she said it. Now, when you hear me say that, how many of you already answered? Well, one, because you're reading it, but two, how many of you already wanted to answer back to me? Because I had a little pause between, it's not what she said, it's how she said it. These are the ways that you take facts and truth and you put them into story form, and it brings your facts and truth to life. So now you heard the story of the Naked Truth. Here's what I want to ask you. If you're willing to share, no, you know what? I'm going to have you do your part. Then I'll come back and ask you. I'm like jumping ahead here. Take 5 minutes and do this section. We're going to come back at 10:57. All right, come on back. I'm so interested to hear how this part went. And I also know that we are in the last few minutes. This time went so fast. We actually, I don't know if I told too many stories or what, but this went so fast. So I want to make sure that we do a quick wrap up. And then for those of you who want to stay, and this is just because of want to honor your time. Many of you might have something else you have to go do. I will stay and answer questions and talk through facts and truths with you. But I do want to do a quick wrap up in the last minute or two here, and then I'll open it up to questions in just a second. If you would, please turn to page 42 on your workbook and write down 1 to 3 takeaways in this first little section here of what you took away from today's training. I'm going to give you like 30 seconds to do that. Okay. So now in the last minute or two, I would love to hear either questions about facts or truths, or if you want to share one, how you took a fact and you turned it into a little story. I want to hear that too. And or if you want to share a takeaway, or if you have a lingering question. So let's open it up to that, and then we will wrap up the day. Who would like to go first? Please just unmute yourself.
Hey, Nikki, it's Eileen.
Hi.
I think for me, it was really great to understand how the brain, hence humans, need to have a story to really understand what you're trying to tell someone. That was important to me. That was a great takeaway.
Good, good. Thanks, Eileen. It's so true. I just saw that, Seishu, you posted a question for me. I'm going to read it because I feel like I'm not sure if I understand the question. Are we going to be talking about where to present these stories next time or sometime during this course? When we start getting into building the story database, there will be some discussion around when to present these stories, but in person, online, and social media, my answer to all of that, Seishu, is yes. Like, if you're not sure how to make an impact, share a story. And you know, there's two kind of ways to make an impact if you're not sure. Either share a story or ask a question. That's really my answer in sales to most everything. Share a story or ask clients questions. It's asking questions gets them to engage with you. Sharing a story, just like Eileen said, it really helps people make sense of the world and make sense of anything. If you think about like all the major causes that people really rally and get behind, there's always a story, like a story that lights that fire for people. That's what really gets people on board about stuff. So if you have a new offer, if you have something that you want to put out into the marketplace, share a story. I tend to share a story. Well, I share stories always in the podcast, but for years when I was just writing a newsletter, almost every newsletter, you can go back and you'll see some story in every newsletter, at least one. Who else? Question, comment? Teresa?
I'm just taking advantage of having direct help from you. So my client, Cindy, felt left out. She wasn't one of the 30% of American women who use a household budget.
I love that. Haven't we all related to feeling left out? Yes. And then I love that. I think that's super powerful. Now, how you know they work is you get a response from the client, the person that you're talking to, that's like, oh yeah, that's been me. I relate to that. Now, when I say I love it, like it does relate to me, right? So, or I can find myself in the story, or I can see how it would work for clients. But the ultimate test is to share these stories, start telling these little things, start putting these little statements when you're talking with your clients over the next week, and see if they are relating to them, if they're asking questions, if they're more engaged. And if they're not working. So we got to keep tweaking, keep working on it. I know you, Teresa, you and I work on this stuff. So good. Who else? Anybody else have something they want to share?
Yeah.
Kim?
Yeah, so I was working on the list of facts. And so I think I need just a little nudge on how to make it a better truth, an improved truth. So the first one I did was, not all coaches have run more than one kind of business. Is that enough? Is it too vague? Because I've run businesses in very polar opposite industries.
Yeah. So I guess one of the ways that I would say it is, and this kind of goes back to a little bit of, I try to stay away from what others don't have, and I talk about what I do have instead, right? Like, instead of saying like, you know, most other coaches haven't run multiple businesses, the flip way that you could say that is, one of the things that makes me unique as a business coach is that I have run multiple businesses. So you see how it's the same thing, but now I'm focused more about like what I have done or what I can do. So just where I say like, not all NLP trainings are created equal. Now I do say most people have like less than 200 hours, but I have 1,200 hours. I'm really focused on the what I have. So it's okay to say like give a disparity between me and the other person, or you and the other coaches. You might say, you know, most business coaches have maybe run one business or multiple businesses, even in the same industry. One of the things that makes me unique is that I have run multiple businesses in multiple industries. So I have a more well-rounded perspective that I bring to the table.
Perfect. Thank you. That's exactly what.
Anybody else? I also want to honor if you're like, Nikki, you're 5 minutes over time if you need to go. This is being recorded, but thank you for sticking around. All right, going once. Anybody else want to speak up? Going twice. Then we are going to bring this to a close, and I will be so excited to see you next Wednesday. Get ready, like put your like thinking hats on for next Wednesday, because it's going to be a lot of digging into your own stuff, your own stories. We're going to start to build your story database come next Wednesday. So I will see you at 9 o'clock Pacific time next Wednesday. Thank you for being here. Have a great rest of your week.